I looked at my reflection in the mirror and smiled at what I saw for the first time in a long time. The new mint-colored dress with a small floral print fit well, hiding some of the age-related features of my figure. 67 years old is no joke, but I've always tried to take care of myself as much as possible for a woman who has spent most of her life in hospital corridors, saving other people's lives. "Meredith Lambrose, you're the birthday girl today," I said to my reflection and chuckled softly at my own joke. Birthday. One of those days when the family gets together, pretends everything is fine and everyone loves each other. I used to believe in that illusion. Now it felt more like an annual ritual that my children performed out of a sense of duty rather than love. Tonight's dinner was at the Silver Maple, the most expensive restaurant in our town in Michigan. It was my eldest daughter, Lorraine, who had suggested it. "Mom, you're 67. You have to celebrate in style," she said on the phone 3 days ago. And she booked a table for 8 in the evening. Lorraine always loved doing things in style, especially when she wasn't paying. I knew that this dress was my little victory. I usually wore something plain and dark to family gatherings so as not to attract too much attention. But today, I decided to treat myself. A week ago, I saw this dress in the window of a small shop and couldn't walk past it. I spent almost $200, an amount I usually stretched over a month of small expenses. One last look in the mirror, a light spray of the perfume my youngest daughter Gwen gave me last Christmas, and I was ready. I wanted to believe that tonight would be special. The taxi stopped at the entrance to the Silver Maple at exactly 8 o'clock. I had always been punctual, unlike my children, and today I was the first to arrive. The doorman helpfully opened the door, and the manager showed me to my reserved table. It was a large round table for 9, impeccably set with a snow-white tablecloth. 15 minutes later, Gwen arrived with her daughter Zoe. "Happy birthday, Mom!" Gwen hugged me tightly, and I could smell the machine oil in her hair. She always smelled like her work. An industrial equipment repair technician is rarely spotlessly clean. "Grandma, you look amazing," Zoe exclaimed sincerely, taking a small package out of her backpack. "This is for you. I made it myself." Inside the small box was a bracelet made of colorful beads. It was a naive, touching gift from a 17-year-old girl. I put it on immediately. "It's real amber. I saved up for 3 months to buy it," Zoe said quietly, and I squeezed her hand under the table. Next came Flynn with his wife Bridget and their son Dexter. Flynn, my middle child, had always been strangely similar to his father. The same soft features, the same indecisive smile. He kissed me on the cheek and handed me a gift bag with the logo of a local department store. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said without much enthusiasm. Bridget, his wife, just nodded, instantly assessing the atmosphere in the restaurant. Dexter, their 14-year-old son, kept his eyes glued to his phone. "Dexter, say hello to your grandmother," Bridget said through clenched teeth. "Hi, Grandma," he muttered without even looking up. I was used to this kind of treatment and just smiled. "It's okay. I understand that young people have their own interests." "You're too soft on him." Bridget shook her head. "That's probably why my husband is such a spineless wimp." Flynn pretended not to hear the comment. He always pretended not to hear when his wife said nasty things. The last to arrive, 20 minutes late, were Lorraine, her husband Kip, and their daughter Audrey. Lorraine was wearing an elegant black dress with a pearl necklace that I had given her for her 30th birthday. Kip, as usual, was wearing a suit that looked like it cost as much as a month's rent for my apartment. Audrey, their 19-year-old daughter, looked like she had just stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. "Happy birthday, Mom!" Lorraine said loudly, attracting the attention of the neighboring tables. She kissed the air near my cheek and immediately stepped back, giving me a once-over. I saw her eyes linger on my new dress, and something in her gaze made me tense up inside. "Thank you for organizing this evening, dear," I said, trying not to show my unease. "I just thought we all needed to get together sometimes," she replied, taking a seat across from me. "You know how busy Kip and I are. His business is expanding, and we're thinking about moving to the suburbs of Detroit." "Yes, things are going well," Kip confirmed importantly. "Last month I signed a contract for 3 new office buildings." I nodded, even though I had already heard this story on the phone at least 3 times. Kip loved to repeat his success stories, especially in front of the whole family. The waiter took our orders, and the conversation at the table began to flow as usual. Lorraine talked about her job as a purchasing manager and how she had saved the company from a bad deal. Kip echoed her with stories about his growing alarm installation company. Flynn occasionally chimed in with comments about insurance claims he had had to assess. Bridget complained about her boss, who was a dentist. Gwen was silent, only occasionally answering direct questions. "Grandma," Zoe said to me unexpectedly, "tell us about your job in intensive care." "I need to interview someone with an unusual job for a school project." I smiled. "Well, a nurse in intensive care isn't such an unusual job." "Oh, Mom, don't start with your endless stories about the hospital," Lorraine interrupted, rolling her eyes. "We all know them by heart." "I don't know," Zoe said quietly. "Because you're too young to understand how boring it is," Lorraine snapped. I felt the color drain from my cheeks. Yes, maybe my stories about work weren't the most exciting, but it was my life. 35 years in the emergency room. I had seen more deaths and miraculous recoveries than anyone else at that table. "Lorraine, I think Zoe can decide for herself what she's interested in," I said gently. "Of course, Mom." Lorraine took a sip of wine. "By the way, I've been meaning to ask, that dress, is it new?" "Here it comes." I knew this moment would come. "Yes, I bought it last week," I replied, trying to sound casual. Lorraine exchanged glances with Bridget, and they both smiled slightly. "And how much did you pay for it?" Lorraine asked. "Does it matter?" Gwen interjected. "Of course it does." Lorraine put her glass down on the table. "Mom is always complaining that she doesn't have enough money, that her pension is too small, and then she spends it on this." She uttered the last word with such contempt that I physically felt the blow. "I think Grandma looks beautiful," Zoe interjected again. "Sweetie, you just don't understand." Lorraine smiled condescendingly. "At her age, such bright colors and that print. Mom, honestly, you're dressed like a country bumpkin. You're embarrassing us." There was a silence so deep that I could hear my heart beating. Gwen stared at her sister with her mouth open. Flynn stared at his plate. Bridget hid a smile behind her glass. Kip pretended to be very busy with his steak. Audrey giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Dexter seemed to have looked up from his phone for the first time all evening. I looked at my eldest daughter and couldn't believe those words had come out of the mouth of the person I had given birth to. The person I had worked 2 jobs to pay for college. The person I had held in my arms at night when she was teething. In that moment, something inside me broke. Not my heart, that kept beating. Some invisible thread that tied me to the illusion that my family was a place where I was loved and respected snapped. I slowly folded the napkin and placed it next to the plate. "You know, Lorraine," my voice sounded unexpectedly calm, "when you were 15 and wanted to go to the school prom, but we didn't have money for a dress, I took extra night shifts at the hospital. I worked 16 hours a day for 3 weeks straight to buy you that blue dress with silver sequins. Remember? You were so happy." Lorraine looked embarrassed. "Mom, why are you bringing this up now? When you were 20 and wanted to go to college, I sold the engagement ring your father gave me. It was the only thing I had left of him after he died. But I sold it because your education was more important." "Mom, please don't start. When you were 25 and you and Kip decided to get married, you didn't have enough money for a wedding. I took out a loan that I paid off over 7 years so you could have the wedding of your dreams. Remember how you told all the guests that your dress was from a famous designer? You didn't tell anyone that I made it myself, late at night after work." There was complete silence at the table. Even Dexter put his phone down. "And you know what, Lorraine?" I continued, looking her straight in the eye. "I have never, not once in all these years, told you that you've been an embarrassment to me. Not even when you came to me pregnant at 19 and admitted you didn't know who the father was. Not even when you dropped out of college after I sold my last valuable possession to pay for your tuition. Not even when you didn't visit me for 2 years because you were too busy. I never said you were embarrassing me." I got up from the table. My hands were shaking slightly, but my voice remained firm. "Now I'm going home, and I'm going to think about where I went wrong in raising you." I turned to the others. "Thank you all for coming. Gwen, Zoe, Sheldon will come pick me up, so don't worry." I left the restaurant without looking back. The cool evening air touched my face, and only then did I feel tears running down my cheeks. I dialed the number of Sheldon, my neighbor and friend. "Sheldon? It's Meredith. Can you pick me up at the Silver Maple?" "Yes, right now. No, everything's fine. I just want to go home." Standing on the sidewalk in my new mint-colored dress, I felt a strange sense of relief for the first time in many years. It was as if I had shed a heavy burden that I had been carrying all my life, a burden of expectations, hopes, and self-deception. My eldest daughter thinks I'm a hick who embarrasses her. My middle son can't stand up for his mother in front of his own wife. Only my youngest daughter and granddaughter see me as a person. Where did I go wrong? That question pulsed in my head as I waited for Sheldon, and the second, more important question, what am I going to do now? One thing I knew for sure, I would no longer be anyone's doormat. Enough was enough. At 67, it's not too late to start respecting yourself. Sheldon drove me home in complete silence. He knew me well enough to understand that when I was ready to talk, I would speak. "Thank you," I said when we stopped at my small one-story house on Maple Street. "You're welcome," he said, looking at me with his faded blue eyes. "Come in for coffee tomorrow? I'll bake your favorite blueberry muffins." I nodded, grateful that he didn't ask what had happened. The house greeted me with silence and coolness. I flipped the light switch, and a dim light flooded the living room. A small room with a worn sofa, an old TV, and bookshelves along the walls. Framed photographs. My whole life in pictures. The children were small and happy. Older children already with forced smiles. Grandchildren, Audrey with a forced smile, a copy of her mother. Dexter indifferent to everything. And only Zoe smiles sincerely. I took off my shoes, went to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. I sat down at the small kitchen table and stared at the wall, where an old calendar with pictures of national parks hung. "You're dressed like a country bumpkin. You're embarrassing us." Lorraine's words echoed in my head. It wasn't so much the hurtful words themselves as the tone in which they were said. Contempt. As if I were some kind of burden, an inconvenient piece of furniture that spoiled the interior of her perfect life. I looked at my hands, old nurse's hands with protruding veins and knotty joints. These hands had held newborn Lorraine. These hands had wiped her tears when she fell off her bike. These hands had cooked her meals, washed her clothes, ironed her dresses. These hands had saved strangers' lives in the emergency room, given injections, changed IVs, performed CPR. And now these same hands weren't good enough for my daughter. Just like me. The phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Gwen. "Mom, are you okay?" Her voice sounded worried. "Yes, sweetie. Sheldon drove me home. I'm sorry about Lorraine. She shouldn't have said that." I smiled weakly. "Don't apologize for your sister, Gwen. You're not responsible for her words." "But it was your birthday." "Yes, and it clarified a lot for me." I sighed. "Thank you for calling, dear. Tell Zoe I really appreciate her gift. The bracelet is beautiful. She's worried about you. Tell her I'm fine. And Gwen, I love you both. We love you too, Mom." I ended the call and put the phone on the table. At least I had Gwen and Zoe. That was something. My gaze fell on the photo on the refrigerator. Me and Howard, my late husband, on a picnic a year before he died. I was younger then than Lorraine is now. 35 years ago, a heart attack took him from us. The children were still young. Lorraine was 25, Flynn was 22, and Gwen was only 18. "Oh, Howard," I whispered, looking at the photo. "What would you say if you could see how our children have grown?" I could almost hear his reply, with his characteristic hoarse laugh. "Meredith, you've let them walk all over you for too long. It's time to show them who's boss." Howard had always been straightforward. He was a truck driver and often went on long trips. But when he came home, the whole family felt his presence. He didn't let the children talk back to me, even about little things. "Respect for your mother is the first thing children should learn," he used to say. After he died, everything changed. I was so focused on feeding my 3 children that I missed the moment when respect turned into condescending tolerance and then outright contempt. Especially from Lorraine. She always wanted a better life. and was ashamed of our modest home, my job as a nurse, and our social status. When she married Kip, the owner of a small but profitable alarm installation company, her desire for status only grew stronger. Flynn had always been a quiet, obedient child, but his wife, Bridget, quickly figured out how to manipulate him and won him over to her side. She saw me as a rival for influence over her husband, even though I never interfered in their family affairs. Only Gwen, my youngest, maintained a normal relationship with me. Perhaps it was because she became a single mother at an early age and understood what it was like to raise a child without support. Or maybe it was simply because she had inherited Howard's character, straightforward, honest, and unpretentious. I got up and went to the window. It was getting dark outside, and the lights were coming on in the houses across the street. Life went on as usual. Suddenly, I felt a strong urge to talk to someone who had known our family for many years. Someone who could give me the perspective I lacked. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Sheldon, it's me again. Sorry for calling so late. Could you come over? I need to talk." 15 minutes later, Sheldon was sitting at my kitchen table, and I was telling him what had happened at the restaurant. He listened without interrupting, only shaking his head from time to time. Sheldon Creek had been my neighbor for almost 20 years. A widower like me, he was a former long-haul truck driver. We had never been a couple, just good friends who supported each other through tough times. And you know what's the worst part? I finished my story. I realized that I raised a selfish person, a person who looks at her own mother and sees nothing but a hindrance to her perfect image. Sheldon was silent for a long time before answering. "Meredith, I've known your children since Gwen was a teenager and Lorraine was finishing college, and I've seen how their attitude toward you has changed over the years. And what did you see?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "I saw how you gave them everything, your time, your money, your energy, your care, and they took it for granted, especially Lorraine and Flynn. You never asked for anything in return, not even basic respect, and they got used to it." I nodded. Sheldon had said what I had been thinking all along. "I also saw how they started waiting for you to die," he added quietly. "What?" I wasn't sure I had heard him correctly. "I'm sorry to be so blunt, but it's true. Remember 3 years ago when you had that minor heart attack and spent a week in the hospital?" I nodded. It had been a terrible time. The doctor said I was lucky it was only a mild attack. "Lorraine came to see me while you were in the hospital. She asked if I knew anything about your will. Not about your condition, not about how she could help, about your will." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Flynn was interested too. Not directly, of course. He asked if you'd ever talked about what you wanted to do with the house after, well, you know." I sat there, stunned by this revelation. My children were discussing my inheritance while I was lying in the hospital. They weren't thinking about how I felt, but about what they would get after I died. "I didn't want to tell you," Sheldon continued. "I thought it would only upset you. But after today, you have a right to know." I got up and started pacing around the kitchen, trying to process what I had heard. "You know, I do have a will," I finally said. "I wrote it after my heart attack. Everything is divided equally between the 3 children, the house, savings, retirement account. It's not much, but it will be enough for them to live comfortably, especially Lorraine with her demands." Sheldon looked at me intently. "And you still want to leave everything equally divided? After today?" The question caught me off guard. I had never considered an alternative. Isn't that what all parents do? Divide their inheritance equally among their children? I don't know," I replied honestly. "Think about it, Meredith," Sheldon said gently. "A will is the last way you can show them that their behavior has consequences." I sank into a chair, feeling suddenly very tired. "You think I should disinherit Lorraine? And Flynn too? I think you should do what you think is right. But remember, Lorraine has her own home, a successful husband, and a good job. Flynn is also well established, and Gwen is raising a daughter on her own, working a tough job, and has never asked you for anything." I thought about his words. Gwen had always been self-sufficient. Even when she was having a hard time, she rarely asked me for help. Unlike Lorraine, who, despite her wealth, was always asking for something. Do you know the last time Lorraine visited me just because, without asking to borrow money or sit with Audrey? I asked Sheldon. 2 years ago, at Christmas. And she only stayed for an hour, constantly glancing at her watch because she and Kip were rushing to some important party. Sheldon nodded. And Gwen comes over every week. She brings groceries, helps with cleaning. Zoe often stays over, and they never make you feel like a burden. Yes, I agreed quietly. They're the only ones who really care about me. We sat in silence for a while longer. Then Sheldon left, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I hardly slept that night. I tossed and turned in bed, remembering the years after Howard's death, how I tried so hard to be both a mother and a father to my children, how I worked myself to exhaustion to give them everything they needed, how I denied myself everything so they could have the best education, the best clothes, the best opportunities. I remembered how proud I was of their successes, how happy I was for their victories, and how I gradually became less and less important to them, especially to Lorraine. A scene from 10 years ago flashed before my eyes. I arrived at Lorraine's for dinner, bringing a homemade pie. Kip opened the door and pretended to be surprised to see me, even though we had agreed beforehand. Lorraine was busy preparing for some important event and barely had time to say hello. Audrey, then a teenager, pointedly ignored me. I sat alone in the living room for an hour, then quietly left. No one even noticed I was gone. Or another time 5 years ago when I broke my wrist. Gwen flew out to me, brought food, helped with cleaning, took me to the doctor. Lorraine called once. Flynn stopped by for 5 minutes on his way home from work. Both of them were too busy to help. Every memory was like a punch in the gut. I tried so hard not to see the obvious. I clung so desperately to the idea that my children loved me that I simply didn't notice how little I meant to them. And now Sheldon said they were waiting for me to die so they could get their inheritance. And to be honest, I couldn't blame him for thinking that. Their behavior spoke for itself. By morning, I had made up my mind. I would change my will, but not out of revenge, out of fairness. Gwen and Zoe deserved better. They were the only ones who saw me as a person, not an ATM or a burden. I drank my coffee, took a shower, and called my lawyer, Veronica Hammett. Veronica, this is Meredith Lambrose. I need to make some changes to my will. Yes, it's urgent. Can I come in today? When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if I had lifted a heavy burden that I had been carrying for years. A burden of guilt, doubt, and self-deception. It was time to start living for myself, and for those who truly loved me. Veronica Hammett's office was located in a small 2-story building in the city center. A modest sign read Legal Services, and the windows were spotless. I had only been here twice. Once when I drew up my initial will after Howard's death, and once when I updated it after my heart attack 3 years ago. Today, the office looked exactly the same. A neat reception area with leather chairs, a secretary's desk, and a few houseplants that created an illusion of coziness. Behind the desk sat a young man of about 25 with carefully styled hair and a professional smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Lambrose," he greeted me. "Miss Hammett is expecting you. Please come into her office." I nodded and headed for the familiar door. Only now did I notice the name on the secretary's badge. Trevor Pettigrew. The surname seemed vaguely familiar, but I didn't think much of it. Veronica met me at the door of her office. A 65-year-old woman with short gray hair and piercing green eyes. She always gave the impression of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Meredith, good morning," she said, shaking my hand. "Come in, have a seat." "Coffee?" "Yes, please," I replied, settling into a comfortable chair across from her desk. Veronica poured me some coffee from a small pot on the table by the window and sat down across from me. "So, you want to change your will?" she said, getting straight to the point. "Has something serious happened?" I took a sip of coffee, gathering my thoughts. Where to start? With Lorraine's humiliating comment? With Sheldon's revelation that my children had been discussing my inheritance while I was in the hospital? With the realization that I had wasted my life on people who saw me only as a source of profit? "Yesterday was my birthday," I began slowly. "My family and I had dinner at the Silver Maple. I told Veronica everything that had happened, about the dress, about Lorraine's comment, about how I left the restaurant, about my conversation with Sheldon and his revelation. I woke up this morning and realized I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. I finished my story. I've turned a blind eye to how my older children treat me for too long. They're waiting for me to die, Veronica, waiting to divide my property. Veronica listened attentively, without interrupting. When I finished, she nodded. And you want to disinherit them? Not exactly. I shook my head. I want to do what's fair. Gwen and her daughter Zoe are the only ones who really care about me. They deserve most of the inheritance. But I don't want to completely exclude Lorraine and Flynn. Veronica took my folder of documents out of the desk drawer. Let's see what we have, she said, opening the folder. According to the current will, your estate is divided equally among your 3 children, Lorraine, Flynn, and Gwen. The house on Maple Street, your retirement account, your savings, your personal belongings, everything is divided into 3 equal parts. I nodded. That was exactly what I had planned originally. It seemed fair to me to divide everything equally among my children, regardless of their behavior or their relationship with me. After all, I loved them all equally. But now I realized that fairness doesn't always mean equal shares. Sometimes fairness requires taking into account people's actions, their attitudes, their needs. I want to change the distribution, I said firmly. I want to leave the house and most of my savings to Gwen and Zoe. Lorraine and Flynn will get $10,000 each. That's enough so they can't contest the will on the grounds that I forgot them. Veronica raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? That's a significant change. I'm sure, I nodded. Lorraine and Flynn are financially secure. They have their own homes and stable incomes. Gwen is a single mother who works in a physically demanding job. Zoe is about to go to college. They need this help much more. You realize this could cause serious conflict in the family? Veronica asked. I smiled bitterly. What family, Veronica? The one where the daughter publicly humiliates her mother? Where the son can't say a word in his mother's defense? Where the children discuss inheritance while their mother is in the hospital? Veronica nodded, understanding my bitterness. All right, I'll draw up a new will, but I need to ask you a few more questions. Do you want the house to go to Gwen and Zoe jointly, or just to Gwen? I thought about it. Zoe was only 17, too young to own real estate. The house is Gwen's, but on the condition that Zoe always has the right to live there, and set up a separate trust fund for Zoe's education, $50,000 from my savings. Veronica made notes in her notebook. What about personal belongings? Jewelry, furniture, family heirlooms? I remembered the pearl necklace I had given Lorraine for her 30th birthday, the only valuable piece of jewelry I had left. She had worn it yesterday, unaware that in a few hours she would publicly humiliate the person who had given it to her. Most of her personal belongings are with Gwen, but there are a few specific items that I would like to distribute myself. Veronica and I spent the next hour discussing the details of the new will. I was surprised at how much there was to consider, from bank accounts to family photo albums. But with each item, I felt more confident in my decision. When all the details had been agreed upon, Veronica looked at me intently. Meredith, let me ask you something. It has no legal significance. I'm just curious. Are you doing this out of resentment or revenge? I thought about her question. Was I really motivated by resentment? Did I want to punish Lorraine and Flynn for how they treated me? No, I finally replied. This isn't revenge. It's an acknowledgement of reality. I've spent my whole life trying to be fair to all my children. But fairness isn't always equal shares. Sometimes it means giving more to those who really deserve it. Gwen and Zoe deserve more, not because I love them more, but because they have proven themselves to be worthy people. Veronica nodded with satisfaction. Then I fully support your decision. I'll have the papers ready by tomorrow. Can you come by to sign them? Of course, I said, standing up, feeling a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders. Thank you, Veronica. You're welcome, she said, walking me to the door. And Meredith, I'm proud of you. Not everyone is capable of facing the truth, especially when that truth concerns their own children. Leaving Veronica's office, I felt I needed to talk to Gwen. Not about the will, that would be wrong, but just to see her, to make sure I was doing the right thing. I called her, and she immediately offered to stop by after work. Gwen always made time for me, despite her busy schedule. When I got home, I spent several hours looking through old photos. Little Lorraine in her prom dress, which I paid for with 2 weeks of night shifts. Flynn in his first car, which I helped him buy by denying myself everything. Gwen with newborn Zoe, the only one of my children who never asked me for financial help, even when she was going through a particularly difficult time. I remembered how I had dreamed that one day my children would live together in harmony, supporting each other and taking care of me in my old age. I dreamed of family dinners where everyone laughed and shared news, of grandchildren who loved coming to visit their grandmother on weekends, of my children remembering me fondly when I was gone. The naive dreams of a lonely woman. The reality turned out to be very different. Lorraine was ashamed of me. Flynn ignored me. Only Gwen stayed by my side no matter what. At 6 p.m, Gwen and Zoe arrived. They brought pizza and homemade pie. "We decided you shouldn't cook after yesterday," Gwen said, hugging me. "How are you feeling?" "Better than yesterday," I replied honestly. "Sit down, I'll make some tea." We sat down in the kitchen, and I watched Gwen and Zoe set the table, moving in unison like a well-rehearsed duet. Mother and daughter, similar not so much in appearance as in manner. The same hand movements, the same smile, the same way of tilting their heads when listening to someone. "I called Lorraine today," Gwen said, pouring the tea. She's not particularly remorseful." "I'm not surprised," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "She said you were overreacting and that she just wanted to help you look age-appropriate." Gwen shook her head. "I told her she should apologize, but she's not going to," I finished for her. "It's okay, Gwen." "I don't expect an apology." "That's not fair," Zoe interjected. "She had no right to talk to you like that, Grandma." I smiled at my granddaughter. "Life is often unfair, sweetheart. But you know what helps? Realizing who really loves you." We had dinner, talking about Gwen's work, Zoe's studies, and her plans for college. It was a typical family dinner, something I had always dreamed of. And here it was, not with 3 children and all my grandchildren, as I had once imagined, but with only 1 daughter and 1 granddaughter. But for some reason, right now, I felt like I was truly part of a family. "Mom," Gwen looked at me seriously when Zoe went to the bathroom, "I want you to know, no matter what happens, I'll always be there for you. You can count on me." I squeezed her hand. "I know, sweetheart, and I'm very grateful for that." At that moment, I was absolutely certain that I had made the right decision about the will. Gwen and Zoe left around 9, and I went to bed with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Little did I know that at that very moment, news of my new will was already beginning to spread. Trevor Pettigrew, Veronica's secretary, was indeed a relative, the cousin of Bridget, Flynn's wife, and he didn't hesitate to share what he had heard in the office with her. I signed the new will the next morning. Veronica had everything prepared, and the procedure took less than half an hour. When I left her office, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if I had lifted a heavy burden that had been weighing on my shoulders for many years. The rest of the day passed quietly. I went to the grocery store, stopped by Sheldon's for the blueberry muffins he had promised me, and in the evening settled down with a book in my favorite armchair. It was one of those rare books that I had wanted to read for a long time but kept putting off. Either the children were calling with requests, or I had to sit with my grandchildren, or something else got in the way. The phone rang at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. I reluctantly put down my book and glanced at the screen. Lorraine. Strange. She rarely called me herself. I was usually the one who initiated our conversations. "Hello?" I answered, feeling a vague sense of unease. "Mom?" Lorraine's voice sounded tense. "Did you change your will?" I froze. How did she find out? It had only been a few hours since I signed the documents. "What makes you think that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Don't deny it." Lorraine's voice rose. "Trevor Pettigrew, your lawyer's secretary, is Bridget's cousin. He told her that you practically cut me and Flynn out of your will." So that was it. I felt a pang of irritation. Professional ethics apparently meant nothing to this young man. "Lorraine, I'm not going to discuss this on the phone," I said firmly. "Then we're coming over," she snapped. "We'll be there in 20 minutes. Without waiting for my response, she hung up. I slowly put down the phone. We're coming over. So it wasn't just Lorraine. Probably her husband, Kip. Maybe even Flynn and Bridget. I sighed and went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. A difficult conversation lay ahead. Exactly 20 minutes later, as if on cue, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and found Lorraine, Kip, Flynn, and Bridget standing on the doorstep. All four of them looked as if they were going to war. Tense faces, tight lips, determined expressions. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They walked into the living room without even saying hello. Lorraine remained standing while the others sat down on the sofa and in the armchairs, as if on cue. "So," Lorraine began without preamble, "you've decided to disinherit us. After everything we've done for you." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "What have you done for me, Lorraine?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked, opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. We're your children," she finally blurted out. "We visit you, we call you, we take care of you." "Really?" I sat down in my chair, feeling strangely calm. "When was the last time you visited me just because, not to ask me to babysit Audrey or lend you money?" Lorraine frowned. "What does that have to do with anything? I'm a busy woman. I have a job, a husband, a daughter." "Gwen has a job and a daughter too," I pointed out, "but she finds time to drop by every week to help with the cleaning, sometimes just to sit and talk." "That's because she's a lonely loser with no personal life," Lorraine blurted out, "and she has the same kind of job, dirty work with cars. Of course she has nowhere else to go." I felt anger rising inside me, anger that I had suppressed for years. "Don't you dare talk about your sister like that," I said quietly but firmly. "Gwen is a decent, hard-working person. She's raising a wonderful daughter and earning an honest living, and she has never, not once in all these years, made me feel like a burden." "Unlike us, huh?" Flynn interjected, speaking up for the first time. "Is that what you're saying?" I turned to him. "Isn't that true, Flynn? When I broke my wrist 5 years ago, who helped me with my daily chores? Gwen came over every day." "You stopped by for 5 minutes once." "I had work," he defended himself, "and Bridget was pregnant." "Bridget was 3 months pregnant and feeling great," I countered. "So great that you went to the water park that weekend." I saw the photos on social media. Bridget blushed, but immediately went on the offensive. "We don't have to report to you on our every move. And anyway, I think it's ungrateful to deprive your own children of their inheritance because of some petty grievances." "Petty grievances?" I looked at her in bewilderment. "You consider publicly humiliating me on my birthday a petty grievance? Or the fact that you discussed my inheritance while I was lying in the hospital?" All four froze. "What?" Lorraine tried to feign confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Sheldon told me that you came to see him when I was in the hospital with a heart attack. You asked about my will, not about my health." "About my will?" Lorraine turned pale but quickly regained her composure. "That's a lie. Sheldon has always disliked me. He's just trying to turn you against me." "Flynn asked me too," I continued, ignoring her objections. "He wanted to know what would happen to the house after I died. Sheldon had no reason to lie to me about that." Flynn stared at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. "And after all this," I looked at all four of them, "after years of neglect, after the public humiliation at the restaurant, after I found out that you were waiting for me to die so you could divide up my property, you're surprised that I changed my will?" "That's not fair," Lorraine exclaimed. "We're your children. We have a right to our inheritance." "No one has a right to someone else's property," I replied calmly. "Not even children. Especially children who have shown for years that they only value what they can get from their parents, not their parents themselves." "We're going to contest the will," interjected Kip, who had been silent until then. "You can't just disinherit your children. We'll prove you're incompetent." I smiled. "You can try, Kip, but Veronica Hammett is one of the best lawyers in the state. She drafted the will so that it would be virtually impossible to contest. And by the way, I didn't disinherit Lorraine and Flynn completely. Each of them will receive $10,000. That's enough so that the will can't be contested on the grounds that I forgot them." "10,000?" Lorraine almost shouted. "That's all. What about the house? What about your savings?" "The house and savings will go to Gwen and Zoe," I replied calmly. "Those who really cared about me all these years." "That's not fair," Lorraine repeated, and I noticed tears welling up in her eyes. But these weren't tears of remorse or love. They were tears of disappointment and anger, the tears of someone who hadn't gotten what they thought they were entitled to. You know what's not fair, Lorraine? I said, looking her straight in the eye. It's not fair to work 2 jobs to pay for college for a daughter who then drops out. It's not fair to sell your wedding ring, the only memory you have of your husband, to buy your son his first car, who then doesn't find the time to visit you for years. It's not fair to deny yourself everything so your children can have a better life, and then hear them say, "You're a disgrace." The room fell silent. Even Lorraine seemed shocked by the bitterness in my voice. "I don't hold it against you," I continued more softly. "I understand that I am partly to blame. I never demanded respect, never set boundaries, allowed you to take my love and care for granted. I was wrong, and now I'm trying to fix that mistake." "Fix it?" Lorraine laughed nervously. "By taking away our inheritance?" "No," I shook my head. "By showing you that your actions have consequences, that you can't neglect someone for years and then expect them to leave you everything they own." That's blackmail," Bridget exclaimed. "You're blackmailing your children into spending more time with you." I looked at her with regret. "No, Bridget. Blackmail is when you threaten to do something if you don't get what you want. I've already done everything. The will has been changed, the documents signed. Even if you all start visiting me every day, I won't change my mind." "So that's it? Are you just cutting us out of your life?" Lorraine crossed her arms over her chest. "No, dear," I said with a sad smile. "You cut me out of your life a long time ago. I've just finally accepted that fact." Flynn stood up suddenly. "Let's go, Bridget. There's nothing more to discuss here." He looked dejected, and for a moment I thought I saw something like remorse flash in his eyes. But maybe I just wanted to believe that. Bridget followed him, shooting me a nasty look. Kip also got up, but Lorraine remained standing. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "When you're all alone, when you're dying, you'll regret it." I shook my head. "No, Lorraine, I won't be alone. I have Gwen, Zoe, Sheldon, people who love me not for what they can get from me, but simply for who I am." "They're just pretending!" Lorraine's eyes flashed with malice. "Gwen has always been smarter than the rest of us. She knew how to manipulate you to get the inheritance." I sighed. "You're projecting your own motives onto your sister, Lorraine. Gwen doesn't know about the change in the will. I haven't told anyone but Veronica." That seemed to knock the wind out of Lorraine. She opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and left the room. Kip followed her, giving me a warning look. I heard the front door slam, their car start, and tires crunch on the gravel driveway. I was left alone in my quiet living room. But for the first time in a long time, this loneliness did not feel like emptiness or abandonment. It was the calm, peaceful loneliness of someone who had finally faced the truth and accepted it. I returned to my chair and picked up the book I'd been reading before the children arrived. Strangely, after all the turmoil, I felt more alive than I had in many years. It was as if I had finally shed the heavy burden of pretense and self-deception. The phone rang again. This time it was Gwen. "Mom, are you okay? Lorraine just called, screaming something about a will and how you betrayed us all." I sighed. It was time to tell Gwen the truth. "Gwen, honey, yes, I'm fine, but we need to talk. Can you come over tomorrow?" "Sure, Mom. Is something wrong?" "I'll explain everything tomorrow. Don't worry, everything is really fine. It's just, there have been some changes." After talking to Gwen, I sat in my chair for a long time, thinking about how strange life was. I had always imagined that in my twilight years, I would be surrounded by loving children and grandchildren, that my children would be best friends, that my family would be strong and close-knit. Instead, I was sitting in an empty house after a difficult conversation with my children, who had threatened to take me to court. My family is broken, and most likely, the rift cannot be repaired. But strangely, I felt a sense of relief. It was as if I had been wearing clothes that were too tight for years, chafing and preventing me from breathing, and now I had finally taken them off. Yes, it was painful to admit that my older children did not love me as I had always hoped. But in that pain, there was also freedom. freedom from illusions, from self-deception, from endless attempts to earn the love of those who were incapable of giving it. I didn't know what the future would bring. Would Lorraine and Flynn try to contest the will? Would I ever be able to restore even a semblance of a normal relationship with them? But I knew one thing. I would no longer live in fear of losing a love that had never really been there. I was ready to start a new chapter in my life, a chapter in which I was finally myself, not who others wanted me to be. And that thought, despite all the pain of the past day, filled me with a strange, quiet happiness. 3 months, 90 days since my family had finally fallen apart. I sat on the porch of my house, sipping my morning coffee and watching the rising sun paint the sky in soft pink tones. The summer morning promised a warm day. A lot had changed over the past few months. On the outside, my life remained the same house, the same daily rituals, the same neighbors. But inside, I was a different person. For the first time in many years, I felt free. Free from the constant guilt, from the need to live up to other people's expectations, from the fear of losing a love that never really was. After that stormy scene, Lorraine and Flynn didn't talk to me for about a month. I knew from Gwen that they had consulted with lawyers about contesting the will, but apparently they had received an unfavorable response. Veronica really was a good lawyer. Gwen found out about the new will the day after the scandal. I told her everything, about my conversation with Sheldon, my decision, and Lorraine and Flynn's reaction. "Mom, you shouldn't have done that," she said, shaking her head. "I don't want to be the cause of discord in the family." "You're not the cause, dear," I replied. "The cause is their own behavior, and this isn't an attempt to punish them. It's just justice. You and Zoe deserve better." Gwen was silent for a long time, then hugged me tightly. "No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you, not because of the money or the house, just because you're my mom." That moment was one of the happiest of my life. I finally realized that I hadn't made a mistake with any of my children, that I had raised at least one person right. Zoe reacted to the news with typical teenage bluntness. "To be honest, Aunt Lorraine has always been a bitch. I'm glad you finally noticed, Grandma." I couldn't help laughing, even though I tried to scold her for using such language. Sheldon fully supported my decision. "It's about time you showed them you're not a doormat, Meredith. Maybe now they'll finally understand that love has to be earned, not demanded." Gradually, my life took a new turn. I started spending more time on myself. I signed up for painting classes at a local senior center, something I had dreamed of doing for years but always put off. I started going to the theater and concerts with Sheldon more often. I started a small vegetable garden in the backyard, not out of necessity, but for pleasure. Gwen and Zoe came over every weekend. We cooked together, watched old movies, just talked. Sometimes Zoe stayed overnight, and then we talked late into the night about her plans for the future, her first love, her fears and hopes. I was finally getting to know my granddaughter for real, not just in glimpses like before. About 2 months after our argument, Flynn called. The conversation was tense but polite. He didn't apologize, but he didn't blame me either. He just asked how I was doing and told me a little about work. At the end of the conversation, he awkwardly invited me to Dexter's birthday party. "I can't promise it'll be fun," he said, trying to joke. "You know Dexter, he's always on his phone." I went, albeit with some trepidation. Bridget was overly polite, but cold. To my surprise, Dexter actually took his eyes off his phone for a whole 15 minutes to thank me for the gift, a robot building kit I had chosen on Zoe's advice. "Thanks, Grandma," he said, and for a moment I saw a spark of interest in his eyes. That's cool. Not the most emotional reaction, but for Dexter, it was almost a display of enthusiasm. Lorraine held out the longest. No calls, no messages, just cold silence. Gwen said her sister was furious and had sworn never to speak to me again. I wasn't surprised. Lorraine had always been the proudest of my children. And then, almost exactly 3 months after our argument, she showed up at my doorstep. It was Saturday morning. I had just finished breakfast and was about to do some work in the garden. "Mom," she said, standing in the doorway with an awkward smile. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside silently, letting her into the house. Lorraine looked impeccable, as always, an elegant summer dress, perfect hair, flawless makeup. But there was something different in her eyes, a kind of uncertainty I hadn't noticed before. "Coffee?" I offered, heading for the kitchen. "Yes, thank you." She followed me, looking around as if she hadn't been here in years, even though it had only been 3 months. I silently poured her coffee and added milk. She always drank it with milk, never sugar. "You look good," Lorraine said, taking the cup. "Have you lost weight?" "A little," I nodded. "I'm exercising more and started a vegetable garden." "A vegetable garden?" She raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You never liked gardening." "People change," I shrugged. "How are you? How's Kip and Audrey?" "Everything's fine." She took a sip of coffee. "Audrey got into college. Kip is expanding his business." We were silent. An awkward pause lingered. "Mom," Lorraine finally began, placing her cup on the table. "I came to apologize." I looked at her intently, waiting for her to continue. "What I said at the restaurant, that was awful. I shouldn't have said that. And then, that scandal over the will," she faltered. "I acted like a spoiled child." I remained silent, trying to gauge how sincere she was. Lorraine always knew how to apologize beautifully when she wanted something. "I've been thinking a lot these past few months," she continued, "about us, about you, about the kind of daughter I've been. And I realized that you were right. I took you for granted. I expected help and support, but I rarely gave anything in return." She seemed genuinely remorseful, and for a moment I believed that she had really changed. But then she said, "I hope you can forgive me, and maybe reconsider your decision about the will." There it was, the real reason for her visit. "Lorraine," I sighed, "you still don't understand. It's not about the money or the house. It's about respect, about a genuine relationship." "But I'm truly sorry," she protested. "I really want to make things right." "If you really wanted to fix our relationship, you wouldn't even mention the will," I said gently. "You would have just come, apologized, and started building a new, healthy relationship. No strings attached, no expectations of financial gain." Lorraine lowered her eyes. "That's not fair. I'm your daughter. I have a right." "No, Lorraine," I interrupted. "No one has a right to someone else's property, not even children, especially children who have shown for years that they only value material things." "So you won't change your mind?" Her voice grew colder. "No," I shook my head. "But I'm offering you something more valuable." "What?" She looked at me skeptically. "A real relationship. No manipulation, no conditions, no ulterior motives. Just a mother and daughter who love and respect each other." Lorraine looked confused, as if I had offered her something incomprehensible, something she couldn't wrap her head around. I don't know," she finally said. "Think about it." I smiled gently. "Money and possessions are temporary. Real relationships last forever. They support us in difficult times, give us joy and meaning in life." Lorraine was silent, twirling her cup of cold coffee in her hands. "You know," I continued, "I don't hold anything against you. I understand that I am partly to blame for how our relationship turned out. I never set boundaries. I let you take my love and care for granted. I was wrong, and now I'm trying to fix it." "Fix it by depriving me of my inheritance?" Her voice was bitter again. "No, Lorraine, by showing you that true value isn't in inheritance, but in sincere relationships. You can be angry with me, you can think I've been unfair, but ask yourself honestly, if I died tomorrow, how would you feel? Grief at the loss of your mother, or relief at receiving your inheritance?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, and I saw confusion in her eyes. I would grieve, of course," she finally squeezed out. "You're my mother." "Are you sure?" I asked quietly. "Because for the last few years you've acted like I'm nothing but a source of income for you. An ATM that has to give you money on demand, a free babysitter for Audrey, an inconvenient old woman who dresses like a country bumpkin and embarrasses you in front of your friends." Lorraine flinched as if I had hit her. Tears welled up in her eyes. "That's not true," she whispered. "I love you." "I love you too, Lorraine," I took her hand. "You're my daughter, and nothing will ever change that. But love has to be shown through actions, not just words. If you really want to fix our relationship, start small. Don't just call when you need something. Don't just drop by to drop off Audrey. Take an interest in my life, my feelings, my thoughts. Treat me like a person, not a convenient addition to your life." Lorraine looked at me for a long time, then nodded slowly. I'll try. "That's all I ask," I smiled. "Try. And maybe, over time, we'll build a new, healthy relationship. A relationship based on mutual respect, not on expectations of gain." She left an hour later, promising to call the following week. I didn't know if she would keep her promise. I didn't know if she could change enough for our relationship to become truly healthy. But I gave her a chance, and that was all I could do. That evening, Gwen and Zoe arrived. We cooked dinner together, laughed, and discussed plans for the future. Zoe talked about the college she was planning to attend, and Gwen talked about a new project at work. I looked at them and felt a deep, calm happiness. After dinner, when Zoe left to call her friends, Gwen helped me clear the table. "Mom," she said, putting the clean plates away in the cupboard, "you seem happier lately, calmer." "I am," I smiled. "I finally started living for myself, not for others." "I'm sorry about Lorraine and Flynn," Gwen sighed. "I always hoped we would be a close-knit family." "Me too," I said, stroking her arm. "But you know, sometimes you have to accept reality for what it is, not what you want it to be. And the reality is that I have one wonderful daughter and one beautiful granddaughter who love me just for who I am. And that's enough." Gwen hugged me, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Not bitter tears of disappointment, but warm tears of gratitude. Later that evening, after Gwen and Zoe had left, I sat on the porch watching the stars. Sheldon came out of his house across the street and waved at me. I waved back, and he crossed the street to join me. "Good evening," he said, settling into the chair next to me. "Very nice," I agreed. "I saw Lorraine come by today," he remarked casually. "Yes," I nodded. "She was trying to make peace and convince me to change my will." Sheldon chuckled. "I thought so. What did you tell her?" "That the will remain as it is, but I'm ready to build a new, healthy relationship. No strings attached, no expectations." "And she agreed?" "She said she'd try." I shrugged. "I don't know if she's sincere or patient enough. But I gave her a chance, and now it's up to her." We sat in cozy silence, looking at the stars. A soft summer breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, and a dog barked somewhere in the distance. "You know, Meredith," Sheldon said thoughtfully, "I'm proud of you. Not everyone is capable of completely changing their life at 67. To start putting yourself first, to stop being a victim of manipulation. Better late than never," I smiled. "And you know what's most amazing? I'm finally happy, truly happy. Not the restless, nervous happiness of someone trying to please everyone around them, but the calm, deep happiness of someone who lives in harmony with themselves." Sheldon silently shook my hand, and that gesture said more than any words could. I looked up at the starry sky and thought about the path I had traveled, about the young woman who was left alone with 3 children after her husband's death, about the years of hard work, sleepless nights, endless care for others, about how I gradually lost myself, becoming just a shadow, an appendage to my children's lives. And now, at 67, I had finally found myself. I started a new chapter in my life, a chapter in which I was the main character, not a supporting one. A chapter filled not only with caring for others, but also with caring for myself. I didn't know what the future would bring. Would Lorraine really be able to change? Would our relationship with Flynn become warmer? But I knew one thing: no matter what happened, I would no longer sacrifice my happiness for the illusion of family bliss. I would live authentically, honestly, with dignity. And if the only thing I had done right in all those years was raise one decent human being, my Gwen, then that was enough, more than enough.